So much has happened in the US over the last week, from gerrymandering across the South to widespread attacks on opponents to yet more corruption to foreign aggression and undermining science. This is just a whistle-stop tour through all of it. So it's been a week of Republican gerrymanders. So last week, the Supreme Court gutted a section of the Voting Rights Act in such a way as to essentially allow the southern states to break up their majority black districts. And the southern states are now rushing to do exactly that before the 2026 midterms. So Tennessee, Louisiana, and Missouri have all broken up majority black urban districts to each give the Republicans an extra seat. Now, in Tennessee, the Democrat lawmakers actually protested this gerrymander in the state house, and in response, the Republican Speaker of the Tennessee House of Representatives have stripped those lawmakers of all committee assignments as punishment. Then the Supreme Court cleared a path for Alabama to use a new voting map. So this is a voting map that Alabama had tried to use 3 years ago, but was then ruled illegal because it was ruled a racial gerrymander where they were disenfranchising the black voters. And now the Supreme Court saying that given their recent decision, this map could probably be used for the midterms. So Alabama's going ahead and trying to do that. If they're successful, that could give the Republicans another 1 or 2 seats. South Carolina also tried to do a gerrymander, but it actually failed, and it was blocked by the South Carolina State Senate when 5 Republican senators basically crossed the aisle and voted with the Democrats. So we thought that was the end of it, but it isn't, because the Republican governor of South Carolina then called lawmakers back for a special session at the end of last week to basically insist that they redraw the state map and eliminate its only majority black district. If that succeeds, then that's another seat for the Republicans. So overall, this is likely 4 to 5 extra seats for the Republicans. Plus, they've got another 4 seats now because the Florida Republican gerrymander succeeded, but the Virginia Democrat one did not when the Virginia Supreme Court ruled their gerrymander illegal. It has been a doozy of a week for attacking enemies. So let's start with Trump, who has been on a tear on Truth Social. First, he attacked Democrat Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker with an AI-generated cartoon, basically mocking Pritzker's weight and accusing him of being too busy eating to keep Chicago safe. Trump also attacked Supreme Justices Gorsuch and Coney Barrett for ruling against his tariff policy. He said they were disloyal for ruling against him when they were appointed under his presidency. Now, Supreme Court justices are supposed to follow the law and the Constitution. They are not supposed to be influenced by loyalty to a president. Trump also then threatened a primary challenge for hardline conservative Representative Lauren Boebert. So normally she's considered a staunch Trump ally, but she then campaigned for House Representative Thomas Massie in his Kentucky district, and Trump does not like Thomas Massie. So he wrote on social media, "Boebert is campaigning for the worst Republican congressman in the history of our country, Thomas Massie, of the great Commonwealth of Kentucky. And anybody who can be that dumb deserves a good primary fight." Trump had previously also attacked 2-term Republican Senator Bill Cassidy because he felt that Cassidy wasn't loyal. Now, those attacks worked, as this week Cassidy lost his bid for re-election in Louisiana's primary for senator. Basically, the Trump-backed challenger Julia Letlow and then another state treasurer John Fleming advanced to the June runoff. Trump then used Truth Social to gloat about Cassidy's loss, saying his disloyalty to the man who got him elected is now part of legend, and it's nice to see that his political career is over. The next day, Senator Lindsey Graham supported Trump's position, saying in an interview that there's no room within the Republican Party to destroy President Trump's agenda. So, moving on to the media, Trump attacked Fox News for inviting on Democrat congresspeople and commentators. While at it, he then called Democrat Congressman Ro Khanna scum, Hakeem Jeffries very low IQ, and Bill Maher as low-rated. He basically implied that to help Trump win elections, Fox News should not invite on any Democrats ever. A couple of days later, Trump accused media organizations of treason if they reported that Iran is having any success in its war against the US. He took this further in a televised exchange on Air Force One when Trump called a New York Times reporter treasonous and fake for his coverage of the ongoing Iran war. And this is when, only a few days earlier, the Wall Street Journal said that it had received subpoenas for the records of its reporters related to one of its articles on the risks of military action in Iran. So this is all quite a chilling attack on freedom of the press. So moving away from the president, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said that he has referred Senator Mark Kelly to Pentagon lawyers for allegedly disclosing classified information about depleted US weapon stockpiles from the Iran war. But this is information that Senator Kelly says he received directly from Hegseth in a public televised Senate hearing. So it's just one more attack on Kelly. These attacks started several months ago after he participated in a video calling on US military service members to follow the law. Moving on to the Vice President. So Vice President J.D. Vance basically threatened states that don't comply with his crackdown on fraud with the loss of federal funding for Medicaid and Medicare. And the same day, Vance announced that the administration would withhold $1.3 billion in federal Medicaid payments to California. He basically said that the state had failed to combat fraud in its public health insurance program. And that's a claim that California Governor Newsom vigorously denies. And then finally in this bit, the US Department of Justice has just accused Yale University of illegally considering race in its admissions to its medical school. So this is now the second medical school under scrutiny from the Trump administration. UCLA was already being accused of that earlier this month, and it all forms part of Trump's ongoing anti-DEI agenda. On the international stage, the US has considered asserting its power in Central and South America. So first, Trump said that he's seriously considering making Venezuela the 51st state. And then the US military struck yet another alleged drug trafficking boat in the Eastern Pacific, killing 2 people and leaving 1 survivor. So that now brings the total number of strikes to 58 and the death toll to over 190 people. And this week too, there came a 5-month investigation that has named 13 previously unidentified victims of these US boat strikes. So this joint effort led by 20 journalists from the Latin American Center for Investigative Journalism found that all the victims so far came from extremely poor communities across Latin America and the Caribbean, while at least some of them have no indication whatsoever of any involvement in drug smuggling. A little bit further north, in Mexico, the CIA escalated its secret war on cartels with some fatal operations. And this is while the Trump administration has instructed federal prosecutors to use terrorism statutes to target Mexican officials complicit in the narcotics trade. With the Iran war, there's little sign of any kind of conclusive peace deal between Iran and the US. But both the House and the Senate this week separately blocked war powers resolutions, which would have required congressional approval for Trump to continue his war efforts in Iran. And meanwhile, the Pentagon has now dismantled a legally required civilian harm mitigation and response program, which is designed to handle training and procedures critical in limiting harm to civilians in war. Corruption. There's still a lot of corruption going on. So Trump is still treating Washington, D.C. a bit like his personal property. So a company Trump used for work in his Virginia golf course has been awarded a no-bid $7 million contract to paint the reflecting pool in front of the Lincoln Memorial in D.C. And you may have heard that Trump is staging a UFC cage match on the White House lawn in June. So technically, all of the tickets to watch the match are free, and the UFC is footing the bill for the event. But sponsorship packages that include ringside seats are apparently being selling for $1 million or more. One report said at least $1.5 million. So the White House said, oh, nothing to do with us. You should talk to the UFC. The UFC has reiterated that it's not selling tickets to the event, but it didn't comment or wouldn't say where this sponsorship money was going. And then in January, Trump sued his own Inland Revenue Service, demanding $10 billion in damages for tax leaks during his first term. So the latest is that he's now expected to drop that $10 billion lawsuit in exchange for the creation of a $1.7 billion fund to compensate his allies who claim they were wrongfully targeted by the Biden administration, which is, to say the least, an interesting use of taxpayer money. And then finally, I just want to mention a few worrying ways the administration is still undermining science and evidence-based policy in the US that all happened this week. So last month, Donald Trump fired 22 of the nation's top science advisors from the National Science Board of the National Science Foundation. It has now emerged that Trump fired them just as they were putting the finishing touches to a 2-page report warning that China has raced ahead of the US in key scientific fields. So the board hadn't approved the final version when its members were fired on the 24th of April, and so the report was never released. And then on to RFK Jr., the health secretary. So while he's not said that much publicly about vaccines in recent months, RFK has not abandoned his quest for evidence that they are unsafe. So the New York Times reported that Kennedy is spearheading an intense multi-agency push for government scientists and federal data contractors to examine his long-held theory that vaccines are helping fuel an epidemic of chronic disease, for which, by the way, there is absolutely no evidence. And as RFK seeks to generate his own evidence, he is actually ignoring evidence that already exists in other areas. So the Trump administration has decided to restrict use of federal funds for fentanyl test strips. So these fentanyl test strips were approved for use a few years ago. They're used to help people make sure that drugs don't contain potentially lethal fentanyl. So these strips can save lives, and they have not been shown to increase drug use. And public health officials describe this latest decision as a clear shift away from harm reduction, which could have fatal consequences. So that's all for the roundup this week. All the actions are on trumpactiontracker.info, and I'll be back in a week or so.